A very good afternoon and welcome to Business Live on this Monday with me, Darren McCaffrey. Two big stories for us today. First of all, it is the latest from Wall Street, where we've seen stocks tumbling this afternoon amid fears of a US recession. We've heard from the S&P 500, it's tumbled 2%. That's despite the fact it also fell 3.4% last week, its worst weekly performance in 6 months. The Nasdaq also down 3.1% this afternoon, dragged down by a fall, most notably in Tesla share price, down 8%. As one economist put it, it is getting ugly. We'll be discussing the consequences, not just for shares in the United States, but what it may mean for Donald Trump and indeed for the US economy a little later on in the programme. But the other big story is clearly the developing one that we've seen this afternoon from the North Sea, and that is 36 people who've been brought ashore after a crash between an oil tanker and a cargo ship off the East Yorkshire coast. Footage, as you can see, of that incident shows at least one of those vessels on fire with clouds of black smoke, a pretty horrific scene there just off the East Yorkshire coast. It happened at 10 miles, quite close to Hull, actually, at just before 10 a.m. In terms of the weather, there was some fog, but visibility was described as good. 4 lifeboat crews were called to the incident from Bridlington, Cleethorpes, Mablethorpe and Skegness. Well, joining me now to have a conversation about this is Peter Aylott, who is Director of Policy at the UK Chamber of Shipping. Peter, very good afternoon to you. I suppose the first obvious question in all of this is, how does something like this happen, given all the technology there is now on ships? How could this happen in a scene this morning where we say visibility was pretty good?
Thanks very much. I think a lot of these situations where there is a catastrophic accident, it's very difficult to speculate on what may have happened. There are collisions that happen in the world, not very often these days, with ships, and this is what we call an allision because one vessel is anchor. So it then becomes even stranger that there's been a collision of this sort. But it would be entirely wrong of me to speculate what's happened here. I can mention that some 20 years ago there was a similar scenario in the Far East. So it has happened before, but I think it would be entirely wrong to speculate as to what the real reason behind this terrible tragedy has been.
But we also may have, this is obviously a different incident, and as you say, we don't know the details here, but when that ship crashed into the bridge in Baltimore last year, I mean, the engine failure was at play there, i.e. what I'm trying to suggest here, Peter, is that there are lots of different scenarios that may have led to this collision.
And that's why I think it would be wrong to speculate, Darren. I think that the situation is that we're in the process of recovering the people, the crew, who obviously been through a terribly frightening and dangerous episode. We then have got to contain the fires. There are vessels there now that are trying to contain that fire spread amongst the 2 vessels. They've got to ensure there's no pollution. If there is pollution, contain it and ensure that it doesn't reach the wildlife and the coastline around that area. And then finally, the important thing is the investigation. So the investigation for Baltimore, for instance, and the accident in America and the bridge still hasn't really concluded. So it takes a long time because a lot of evidence has got to be collected. A lot of interviews have got to take place. So it's very early days, really, in that sense. So again, I think it's right to say we should be focusing on the fact that 36, I think it's 37 actually, seafarers have been brought ashore. One is in hospital. We wish him very well. And obviously those people have gone through a very horrible incident and will be, will probably very scared of when they're in the lifeboats and then rescued by the vessels that took them back into Hull and got them into a good place. And then obviously the emergency services are working at the moment desperately hard to try and contain that fire and then get in a position where the ships can be brought alongside and sorted out. So there's a lot of work going on. I think we should be focusing on what measures we need to make sure that pollution doesn't encroach upon the wildlife and habitats around the area, and also that the vessels themselves are put into a safe place.
Yeah, indeed, as you say, fulsome praise there, of course, for the emergency services from the RNLI and the Coast Guard that responded so quickly to this incident this morning. But Peter, I suppose, we look at air traffic control and aeroplanes, our skies are now quite busy, but our shipping lanes and harbours are too. What technology is there in place or procedures for shipping to ensure that incidents like this don't really happen?
Well, there's a huge amount of regulations, laws, protocols, different jurisdictions, an enormous amount of history in the maritime world has gone into getting where ships are operated to today, generally in a very safe way. I mean, these accidents don't happen very often, and I think it's been all the media reports I've heard in the last few hours have stated that North Sea accidents are very rare these days. For instance, there are more aircraft issues taking personnel to and from rigs in the North Sea than there are collisions in ships in the last 10 to 15 years. So that shows you how safe generally shipping is. But collisions do occur. There are more ships than aircraft. The aircraft are controlled by air traffic control, as you just mentioned. That isn't always the case with ships. Ships in places like the Dover Straits will report in so that those can be monitored by authorities on the shore side. And going into ports like Southampton or London or even the Hull, again, there may be a vessel traffic reporting system where there is information exchange and sometimes control of vessels going in and out of harbours. But on this particular incident, one vessel was at anchor on the high seas or territorial waters, but on the seas, and the other vessel was on passage. And that wouldn't usually be controlled by the equivalent air traffic controller. Normally, that would be under the control of the two ships and their bridges and their personnel on the bridges. And they would be using a lot of new and excellent technology to assist them in making decisions regarding anti-collision. And as I said, these accidents are very, very rare. So it isn't something that we see, that's happening so much that we should be too concerned regarding what protocols are used today. I think this needs to be investigated. The investigation needs to report its conclusions. The Maritime Accident Investigation Branch, which is part of the United Kingdom government, is there, and they will make their own, take their own evidence, make their own decisions, and make their own recommendations, and we take it from there.
OK, Peter, for the time being, thank you very much indeed. That is Peter Aloff there from the Chamber of Shipping. Just before we go to the next case, I'm just going to bring you up to date with some lines coming from the Reuters news agency, and that is that the Stena Immaculate tanker, we're told, this is according to a US military spokesperson, was on a short-term charter to US military Sealift Command when it was hit off the northeast coast in England. So that is the US military suggesting that this tanker was on a short-term charter to US military Sealift Command when it was hit this morning. And two maritime security sources have also, and this comes via Reuters again, said there was no indication of any malicious activity or others actors involved in this incident. So they are suggesting that there is no indication of any malicious activity when it comes to this incident this morning. Let's bring in Marco Forgione. He is Director General of the Chartered Institute of Export and International Trade and joins us this afternoon. Marco, very good afternoon to you. We were just talking, I don't know if you heard my conversation with Peter there, just about how unusual, thankfully, these incidents really are.
Yeah, we're very lucky, particularly in the North Sea, which is one of the world's busiest shipping channels, that these sorts of incidents, these types of incidents are extremely rare.
They are rare, but it did happen. What's your thought process on what may have gone on this morning? I mean, these are pretty devastating pictures, and clearly this is, thankfully, everyone is, or we think and believe everyone is safe, but it looks pretty catastrophic, doesn't it?
It really does. No one can but be affected by the images that we're seeing. But obviously, it's a relief that the 36 crew are safe, one still receiving treatment in hospital, we hear. And of course, the brilliant work of the RNLI and others in ensuring that those crew members made it to safety and now actively engaged in trying to dampen the fire. I think we need to wait now to see what actually happens, what the outcome of this crash is, and then how we resolve that before we can even begin to consider what led to this devastating incident.
Just in terms of, we were talking about traffic there earlier and the sheer number of rather large ships that are moving around in our seas and oceans at any given time. Is this, in essence, something that, you know, what may happen more and more, given the sheer scale and number now of vessels moving around in our waters?
Well, as you've identified, the amount of shipping that's taking place is growing dramatically, but fantastically, they do use incredibly modern technology to avoid such sorts of incidences. But the reality is, with highly integrated supply chains and shipping routes, it is unfortunately a reality that there is a risk of incidences. And you mentioned earlier about Baltimore, the fact that a bridge got taken out, devastating the port into Baltimore. We've seen actually militarization and weaponization of trade through Bab el-Mandab and the Suez Canal, the Red Sea. And we've also seen environmental change affecting the Panama Canal. So in a world where we are increasingly reliant on highly fragile global integrated supply chains, I think it's really important that the lessons are learned from this and we look to see how we can build resilient and sustainable supply chains which aren't so impacted by these type of events.
And you talked about the impact it had there in Baltimore. I mean, that was a major port in the United States, wasn't it? And Humberside is a pretty significant port here in the UK. What impact? Because I assume it will have to stay closed for a while. There could be an impact on redirecting cargo ships, tankers elsewhere. Just talk us through the impact this may well have locally and indeed on the UK as a whole in the days to come.
Well, I think there are a number of impacts. First, as you said, is the immediate one, which is access to the ports along the Humber, including Immingham, which, of course, is the largest by volume, by tonnage of the UK ports. We then have to look at the environmental impact and the fact that you've got this aviation fuel spill into the North Sea, which is undoubtedly going to have an impact both on marine life and on seabirds. So that's an issue for us. And then in the medium term, of course, what that means for this area particularly, which is renowned for its fishing fleets. So I think that there are a range of issues that need to be assessed and addressed, but we will come to that once we've managed to deal with this immediate problem. First, we need to make sure that we get the fire put out. We need to get the two tankers back to shore, into a safe environment, and then we need to have an investigation to really understand what's happened.
Fascinating insight there from you, Marco. Thank you very much indeed with the latest on that developing story this afternoon. Marco Forgione, Director General there of the Chartered Institute of Export and International Trade. Other breaking news this afternoon, and that involves the markets in the United States with stocks on Wall Street tumbling. It all comes over fears that President Trump is sparking a potential recession in the United States. Well, this is how Wall Street opened earlier this afternoon, to a sea of red on our screens at our sister channel, CNBC.
Let's get the opening bell here in the CNBC Real-Time Exchange. And the big board, it's executives and guests of Ireland Day. Speaking of kinder worlds, Jim, we'll see if we can regain 5,700. Shy.
I want people at home to know there's two ways you can play this. I can scream, and I can say, look, this is really horrible, and I don't know how Trump betrayed us, and what is like doing. Or you just say, okay, look, you believed him when he said the market was going to be great, and now you believe him when he says, the market's going to be bad.
Angry, ugly, not great. I mean, it's not been a good day, and frankly, it could get worse, couldn't it, Ross?
Been called worse, Darren. No, it's a very tricky time for markets.
I should say who you are, by the way. Ross Mould, Investment Director at AJ Vale, just in case regular viewers didn't know who you are.
That's kind of it is a difficult time, and we've got a situation whereby everybody's been used to the US economy doing extremely well. Stock market's done brilliantly. Earnings expectations are very high, and you are used to having a president and a central bank, when things get sticky, step in to help. Instead, what we have right now, uncertainty over tariffs. worries that the US economy might be slowing down or even tipping into recession according to the Atlanta Federal Reserve, and a president and a central bank who aren't currently offering support, and a president who's even saying, well, if there's a little bit of disturbance or a little bit of inflation, suck on it.
But in saying that, that is against expectations. You know, there are a lot of people leading into the election, particularly on Wall Street, who wanted Trump to win because they thought it was going to be a boom for them. Now, he's only 50 days in, but so far it's been quite the opposite.
It has. I mean, the gains that the stock market made since the election on the 5th of November have all gone. The dollar's lost around half of its gains, and so have cryptocurrencies. But we do need to keep this in perspective. It does only take the stock market back to where we were last October or last November, when sentiment was still extremely positive. So we do need to be a little bit careful here. But you do have, in some ways, all of the ingredients for at least a little bit of a correction, because, again, expectations high, valuations high, not much room for error should anything expected go wrong.
And we're just looking at the currencies, I should say, by the way, and they are slightly down, both sterling and the euro, against the dollar today, but they are normally, or they're doing quite well as compared to the last couple of months. I suppose my big question here is, Trump talked about a recession and the possibility of it yesterday. That seems to what have added to the tumble that we've seen in the markets today. What's your sense of the prospect of a recession in America? Because obviously the economy there has been, Ross, incredibly resilient in recent years, but it is starting to falter a little.
I think the tricky thing we've got is we're going to have some very, very messy, muddy numbers, and I think it's going to make them very hard to interpret. Again, the Atlanta Fed is talking about a drop in economic output in the first quarter, but a lot of that is down to imports going up, and imports, the way the GDP figure is calculated, subtract from GDP, exports add to them, and a lot of companies have been trying to buy in parts, build inventory of raw materials to get ready for the tariffs coming in, so that's creating some noise. And the companies, again, maybe holding off hiring, holding off spending until they know exactly where they stand. And with the current policy announcements of tariffs in, tariffs out, tariffs up, tariffs down, you may get a little bit more of that until we know where we are. So the first half's numbers could be very, very difficult to interpret. That will make things difficult for the US Federal Reserve, and its meeting is due next week on the 19th. At the moment, they seem keen to hold interest rates where they are to make sure inflation is under control, but they may have a more difficult decision coming up.
And we haven't even got on to Tesla, down 8% today and been taking a hammering over the last month or so. Ross, as always, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Ross Mould there from AJ Bell. Thank you. OK, watching Business Live here on Sky News. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, more on that developing story in the North Sea this afternoon. A collision between a cargo ship and a tanker laden with fuel. We'll have continuing analysis in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.
First Minister, how are you?
Good morning. Good morning.
Nice to see you. How are you feeling?
Looking forward to getting into the parliamentary chamber.
Are you any further forward to making a decision?
No, it's an important day today.
All of the claims were in line with my parliamentary duties, so I'm making that clear to you, Conor.
He was a Scot through and through.
He was a very good politician.
Alex Salmond was controversial, he was a disruptor, but above all, he was respected.
Will you resign if you lose this week?
Again, I'm not planning to, of course, lose the vote of no confidence. I'm planning to win that vote of no confidence.
His face said it all.
My intention to stand down as party leader.
This is now a storm with deadly consequences. How are they feeling?
They're a bit scared at the minute.
We've been told to evacuate.
How are you feeling?
Devastated.
Hundreds of homes were wiped out by flooding. I'm Conor Gillis, Sky's Scotland correspondent.
It was probably the darkest time in my life.
Scott is 5 years sober after a cocaine addiction left him close to death. Scotland has a shameful record, worse than England, the worst in Europe.
Why not just say you've failed? Because then you might get more respect from families who've lost loved ones.
This is where one of the UK's most prolific rapists thought he'd got away with murder.
Sky News can reveal that former sex workers had told police he was sexually violent.
My Emma.
Free wherever you get your news.
It's over, isn't it?
The Americans say he is Rossi, a fraudster.
This has been one of the most bizarre cases ever heard in a courtroom in this country.
A dangerous murderer.
Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive Andrew Ennis after this?
She said she can forgive him, but as long as he's behind bars.
By doing the right thing, it's destroyed your life.
They terrorised me. They intimidated me.
Sky News.
The full story first.
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club.
4 more years!
Free wherever you get your news.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
I just took a shower above the clouds. You know why? Because this is the Emirates A380. Fly Emirates, fly better. Thank you.
Very welcome back to Sky News on this Monday afternoon. We're continuing to cover that tanker and cargo ship collision that we saw in the North Sea earlier on today. This morning, we know there were multiple explosions as the vehicles crashed into each other, and jet fuel is now being released into the sea. One crew member is in hospital. We believe that 36 others are safe and accounted for. There has been a little bit of confusion about that, but that's the latest we have. We've also just got some word in from Downing Street in the last couple of minutes, who said that the details of the cause of the collision are still becoming clear, but the Prime Minister's official spokesperson said it was an extremely concerning situation, and went on to say that we want to thank the emergency services for the rapid response. I understand the Department for Transport is working closely with the Coast Guard to help support the response to the incident. We're obviously monitoring the situation. We'll continue to coordinate the response, and we're grateful to the emergency personnel for their continued efforts. They were asked if there are any theories about what may have happened. The spokesman said, my understanding is that the details are still becoming clear, so I do not want to speculate on that. Well, let's speak to Dr. Salvador Mercuriano, who is from the Campbell University in North Carolina. Thank you very much indeed, Salvadori, for joining us. And your impression of what has gone on today?
I think we witnessed a kind of negligence on the part of the container ship, the Salong, which was heading down from Scotland toward Rotterdam. This ship has taken this route multiple times over the past month. It's actually sailed through this very spot at least 5 times recently. So what happens, unfortunately, in the maritime sector is sometimes crews get complacent. The ship was heading southbound, probably on autopilot. In other words, the ship was navigating itself with a mate on watch, and unfortunately in reduced visibility, it was early in the morning, there was fog, they weren't watching their radar, and they basically ran right into the port side of the Stena Immaculate at about 16 knots, or almost 18 miles an hour.
Yeah, and it has been pretty devastating looking at those pictures. And we were just saying earlier, though, and you know this better than anyone else, this is still very unusual, isn't it, for particularly ships of this size with the technology they will have on board to end up in a collision like this?
Correct. I mean, Stena Immaculate was at anchor, so there was nothing they could do to really avoid it. The onus was on the Salong, the Portuguese flag, German-owned container ship that is used in feeder service in Western Europe. It was really on that ship to maneuver around, but unfortunately, either you have a situation where the mate, the person up on the bridge of the ship, was not paying attention. Maybe they had turned off alarms, which would tell them when they were getting close or in a collision situation with a vessel. And so, there's only two things that cause accidents on ships. It's either human or mechanical, and this appears to be human error.
And the investigation will now be underway. Just very briefly, there could be lots of speculation. What's your expert view on what you've read and seen today? What might have caused this?
I think we come back to the issue of whether or not this ship was maintaining a proper watch, the Salong. Who is on watch? Were they doing their requirements to basically look out the window and read their radar? Unfortunately, because of technology and the advancement we have, ships can be put on basically an autopilot system and run a track.
Really fascinating stuff. Thank you very much indeed for your insight this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed. Salvatore, thank you. OK, you're watching Business Live here on Sky News, and that is it for us for today with those developing stories. There will be more with Mark Austin on the NewsHour next, and I'll see you again tomorrow morning. Goodbye.